let's go to the phones. Caller, you're on the air.
Yes, I was curious about your interest in the SS United States.
Oh, yes.
I came back on that ship in January of 1968.
Ah, well, I'm not old enough to remember when she was still around. As long as I can remember, she's been sitting in Philadelphia, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But I'm actually sort of involved in the restoration efforts. I mean,
oh, great!
So that's a whole other story. I mean, actually, now that you mention it, it gives me an excuse to talk about it. So, I've always been interested in old ocean liners, and at one point, I even belonged to the Steamship Historical Society. I used to go up to New York Harbor, and when the older ships that were converted into cruise ships were brought in, the Norway and other ships like that. I'd go up and take tours, and it's just something I've always had an interest in. And the United States is kind of a sad story because it was the greatest ship ever built. It was the fastest. It was the fastest. It was the lightest. It was the pinnacle of what American ingenuity could do, and now it's just sitting rusting away. It's really, it's kind of sad.
Yeah. Have you been on it?
No. I've never had a chance to actually go on board. They do allow some, some people to go on board, but for the most part, it's locked up now. So it's, everything's been stripped out of the interior. The engines are still there. Technically, they could probably get it running again, but it'd probably cost $500 million to get it running again.
Yeah, I'm sure.
The plan for it right now is, the last I heard, they were trying to get it so they could build a casino near it, and then use the ship as a hotel like the Queen Mary.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, they're trying to get it done in Philly so they don't have to move it. But you know how Pennsylvania is with the casinos. They're kind of like we are. They're not too happy about too many of them. So. Hopefully she ends up somewhere so that people can actually learn about the history of the ship. That's what I hope.
It was a wonderful ship.
Oh, I bet it was something to be cruising across the Atlantic at 35, 40 knots.
Yeah, it took 6 days to get from Belgium.
Wow, that's really
five
good.
of us. We had our dog in a kennel on board ship, and they had movies and a swimming pool and wonderful food. And it was a great time.
The travel's not like that anymore. Nowadays, you're just loaded onto an airplane like cattle, and you're flown there. And luckily, it only takes a few hours because it's unpleasant. So, yeah.
The military sent us back. Like we were in Germany for 3 years, and that's the way we came back.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if if I'd been born 25 years earlier, I'd probably be a completely different person now.
Well, that's good that you're interested in it. I'd like to see it restored.
Oh, well, I would too. Actually, if anybody out there is in the same boat as you, so to speak, I believe the website's ssunitedstatesconservancy.org.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah, they're trying to do something with her.
Yeah. Okay.
But thanks for the call. It gave me an excuse to talk about one of the things I love the most.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Have a good afternoon. And I don't think we're going to beat that call, so let's take a check of the AccuWeather, pay a couple bills. 92.7 WGMD, the talk of Delmarva. Let's go right back to the phones. Caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, here is your evening cruise ship trivia.
Oh,
okay.
Any excuse to talk about cruise ships?
Absolutely. What was the only cruise ship to ever sink a German U-boat?
I'll
give you a little hint.
Was it the Queen?
It was a British ship.
So is Queen Mary?
No.
Or Queen Elizabeth?
No.
Or are we talking earlier than that even?
World War I.
So Lusitania.
No.
Now Lusitania got sunk Yes,
By
she was. Yeah, she was on the other side.
Right
of the
off of what was then called Queenstown, but now it's called Ireland.
Let's see. I'll take one. Mauritania.
No. The answer is the HMS Olympic.
The Olympic.
The first of the trilogy.
Yes. Titanic's sister ship.
She was coming out of Southampton, out of the Channel, and this Dumkov surfaced on her port quarter, and the skipper gave the command, hard a port, and cut her in half.
So they didn't even have any gun. That was when she was being used as a hospital ship, right? Or a troop?
No, that was the Britannic.
Oh, the Britannic was the hospital ship.
Yeah, now the Britannic was the last of the three, and she was actually supposed to have been called the Gigantic.
Yes, I do remember that.
And after the Titanic incident, they said, well, maybe that's a bit presumptuous.
Yeah.
And the Britannic never had a paying passenger.
Yeah,
she was conscripted for a hospital ship for the First World War and was sunk by a German mine off of in the Adriatic.
So the Olympic was it was in civilian service when it sank the U-boat then.
It sank the U-boat. It was still in World War One, toward the end of World War One, and it had been converted to a troop ship.
Oh, okay. So they were using it as a troop ship. Okay.
It was carrying troops and so forth, and they had guns fore and aft, like the Naval Armed Guard on our merchant vessels. But the problem was you couldn't get those guns down low enough. A U-boat could sneak in underneath you for quite a ways, and you couldn't get a good shot. And this guy just, surfaced almost on top of him, and he just cut him in half.
It was the wrong place at the wrong time, right?
Yeah, that's right. And of course, that increased the morale of the British people quite a bit because they had lost the Lusitania off of Queenstown, and that was really kind of a low point. Yeah.
Well, it's the Lusitania was the thing that got us into the war too. I mean, that was
finally Wilson decided maybe he didn't have much choice.
Yeah.
He was our Neville Chamberlain.
That's for sure.
Yeah. But at any rate, the Olympic wound up being absorbed by the Cunard Line when they merged in the early 30s. And she wound up being scrapped, and all of her interior beautiful appointments and everything were sold. And the there's a couple of pubs there in Ireland, somewhere around Belfast, that have the interior, the beautiful wood interior. Some of it's still left.
Yeah, that's the one where they took the whole dining room, all the paneling off the walls and everything, and they just took it to a pub or a restaurant, right?
Well, several of them, of course, most of it was sold, and eventually, got put in collections or destroyed or whatever, and the rest of the ship was scrapped. But she had an illustrious career, really, the Olympic did. The Britannic was lost as she was returning from carrying wounded troops, and she sank when she hit a German mine on the port side, and the skipper of that ship said, I'm not going down like the Titanic. I'm running this boy ashore. I'm going to beach it. Well, what he did, he gunned it, and she do about 24 knots, and he just drove it underwater at that point, and the watertight doors, which they had improved after the Titanic, worked, but what they didn't do, they had all of their portholes open.
Oh, jeez.
And they were not supposed to do that because they were in enemy territory, of course, but it was so hot, and, they didn't have air conditioning, so that's why all the portholes were open to air out the ship, and that's what did them in. And they put lifeboats over, but what happened going that fast, the lifeboats were drawn back into the props and cut up. They lost 27 people.
Oh, geez.
Because they did that, but the rest of everybody else was saved. But it's in 300 feet of water, and Cousteau found her some years ago, and she's really in excellent condition. People do dive on her.
Well, yeah, probably much more so than the Titanic. The last I heard, they maybe only have 10 or 15 years left before the Titanic is completely gone.
Yeah, the rusticles have pretty much eaten it alive.
Yeah, and
there's not a whole lot left down there to go before it just just disintegrates totally, just evaporates really.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, those are such big parts of our history. I mean, especially Britain. There's not so much America, but there's so many great ships that were so much part of their history, and that's the thing.
Well,
the thing about the United States, we didn't really ever have a great ship until the 50s, and by then they were obsolete.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing, a lot of people think that the Titanic belonged to the British, and it didn't. The White Star Line was a subsidiary of International Mercantile Marine. And International Mercantile Marine was an American company owned by J.P. Morgan.
Oh.
I have some canceled stock certificates from that company.
Yeah, I actually remember reading that at some point. That's
it's an interesting history, and he was scheduled to come back on her, and 2 weeks before he was scheduled to go on board, something came up, and he had all of these luggage and everything removed from the ship because he had a posh stateroom, of course, and he had something else to do, and then, of course, the ship sank. But by the end of the year, the beginning of 1913, and I don't know whether it was here or somewhere else, but he died later, not too long after the Titanic sank, really, less than a year later.
Yeah, and that's it's definitely interesting stuff.
Yeah, but it was then when Cunard took them over in the early 30s, the White Star Line, they sold everything out that they had.
Oh, yeah.
And in 96, we went on the Royal Majesty to pick up the big piece of the Titanic. And there was 4 survivors that went with us on 2 cruise ships, the Island Breeze and the Royal Majesty.
I actually sailed on the Island Breeze.
Did you really?
Yeah. It was when they were owned by Dolphin, so it was. I always liked that ship. It was kind of a little run down by that time, but it was still really, still a neat ship.
Well, we went out there to pick up the piece, and of course, it had never been tried before, and we had marine architects from Harlan and Wolff on there, and it was interesting because they brought the plans for the Titanic, and those were quite detailed and, were never a mystery to anybody. So when they got down there and they took pictures of it underwater, the marine architect said, "Whoa, wait a minute. You've got material to bring up a 9-ton piece. This is from the upper structure between cabins 89 and 93." And they said that was a restroom area, but that whole superstructure was double steel hull, so we're talking 18 ton.
Ooh. That's a big.
And they
that's a big
used
chunk.
diesel-filled bags for flotation devices. And I mean, Murphy was on board that cruise, I'll tell you, because one of the bags separated. They only got it up to about 200 feet below the surface, and the ship that they had brought, the Killabuk, to bring her up was 200 and some feet. She was a marine salvage tug, and she didn't have a big enough winch.
Yeah, that's a big chunk to bring up all that way.
Yeah, and then they got it within 200 feet of the surface, and we started getting the tail end of Edouard, which was a hurricane coming up the beach, and man, it was bad.
Yeah.
So they tried to, they hooked her up. They said, all right, well, what we'll do, we'll try to tow her into more shallow water, and if it breaks loose, then, it won't be so hard to go down and get. Well, they didn't get but 10 miles, and they were taking 30-degree rolls, and it broke loose. And it sunk in about 10,000 feet of water, but it had GPS on it, and they went back 2 years later and picked it up.
Yeah, I think I saw something about that on the Discovery Channel a couple years back, how they were trying to do that. But
it was interesting because every stateroom we had, closed-circuit TV of everything they were doing, and it was, you could watch it constantly. It was really, really interesting. And memorial services when we got there and we left. It was the only cruise that's ever been back with the public. There's been many attempts and cruises, but it's the only time any of the survivors had returned, and it was the only time any of the public went out there. And it was really, really a momentous occasion. When we got there, we had ministers of, every faith you can think of, and we had a memorial service with bagpipers and the whole bit. And I'll tell you, there was not a dry eye on that ship.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to remember the history like that too. I mean, so it's not forgotten. It's really, it's an important part of an important part of how we developed as a country, and it's good. It's good to. It's good
something we're losing, sadly, because they don't teach it in school anymore.
Yeah, and they definitely don't make ships like that anymore either. So
no,
yep.
Well, everybody said that it had bad steel. Well, that's not true. They made that ship out of the finest steel that they had at that time. The thing that they didn't reckon on was the water was 28 degrees that night, and metal tends to get brittle, and there was never a 300-foot gash down the side, or it would have gone down like a rock. That ship hit that iceberg at 11:40, and it went down at 2:20. So that stayed afloat quite a while. What it did, it popped the rivets on the starboard side, and there was a total of 12 square feet of entrance locations where the water came in. And it would have been much better had the Titanic hit that iceberg dead on.
Yeah, that's what I've always heard. Just they could have stayed afloat and everybody could have been saved.
Yeah, but the watertight, the unsinkable decks and all that was a fallacy, and it was a mistake in the marine architecture of that ship, because what would happen, it would stay afloat with any 5 compartments flooded. But the problem was, every time a compartment was flooded, 18 inches from the top, the bulkheads would empty over into the next compartment. Yeah, and it was like an ice cube tray.
Yeah, they only went up, I think, 4 or 5 decks, I think?
Yeah, and what happened, after she sank, the Olympic was scheduled to go out, and she did, and everybody went on strike, and they didn't get past the Scillies, and they had to turn around and take her back to Belfast, and she was in Belfast being refitted for about 6 or 8 months, and they corrected that. And they put additional lifeboats on there. Originally, the Titanic was scheduled to have 64 lifeboats, and then they cut it to 32, and then they cut it to 16. Nothing but greed in order to get those high-priced staterooms on the top decks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I mean...
And 4 collapsibles, one of which they never got to work.
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely were a lot of lessons that were learned that day, but...
Absolutely. Well, anyway...
Yeah, well,
have a great evening.
Yeah, I want to thank you for the call. Got to do the marine weather and everything, but it's fascinating stuff. I could talk about that stuff all night, so I do appreciate the call.
All right, sir. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And with that, we'll take another short break. We'll be right back. .92.7 WGMD, the talk of Delmarva. If you want to call in about any of the topics we've gone over the last 2.5 hours, still got about 20 minutes to go. Then we got Free Talk Live coming up at 7, from 7 to 10. And then after that, I believe Coast to Coast is on. After that, let's go right back to the phones. Hello, you're on the air.
Yeah, in reference to the Titanic.
Yes.
That guy that you were talking to, I don't know anything about him. I just kind of turned on the radio and heard the last bit.
Yeah.
But the thing with the Titanic, it was a very fast ship. And I think that if the captain would have put the boat in reverse, the boat would run almost as fast in reverse as it would forward. And if he'd have just headed for New York or the nearest port, whichever that was, in reverse as fast as he could go, the water would have never went above those walls.
Well, see, the thing that happens when you go a high speed in a big ship, and I forget what the term is, but what happens is when you gun it, the ship sinks into the water, and the damage to the Titanic was already below the waterline. It was.
I understand that, but you can take a boat, and put a hole in the back of it, and like a regular power boat.
Yeah.
As long as you're running and with any speed, it's going to stay. What I'm saying is the water would have gone out that hole instead of going in that hole.
Yeah, I think I get what you're trying to say. I'm not an expert on ships.
It just sat still once it hit the iceberg and sunk.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
and like I said, if it had been going in reverse, it would have been self-bailing, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
And the guy that was talking, if he thinks that's wrong or right, he can call back. I'd like to hear his response.
Yeah, well, I mean, for all the years that I've been interested in this, the thing that they say would have saved the ship the best is what he said, ramming the iceberg head on. They wouldn't have been able to move, but they could have at least stayed afloat until help got there. And and another thing that they did when the iceberg was sighted, I believe they put the engines in reverse, and that kind of killed the maneuverability of the ship. Because what happens is when you're going forward and then you put it in reverse.
And rudders don't work unless you're moving fast.
Yeah, yeah. And
if they'd have just pulled full rudder and kept the throttle on it, they'd have been better off.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess it's one of those things with hindsight being 20/20, right?
Oh yeah, that's what we're dealing with here is hindsight, and that's why I've always been wanting to ask a marine engineer, architect, what his theory was that if the boat had been, supposedly they were trying to set like a speed record or something. They were going too fast because for some reason, it's my understanding that the people that were supposed to be on watch were watching for icebergs. Were supposed to have binoculars, but they didn't have any.
Well, see, there were a lot of things that went on. I mean, they were going too fast for being in an iceberg field.
Right.
They were trying to break the speed record, which is, was a common thing back then. And the other thing that was a problem was that the sea was really calm that night, so there were no breaking waves at the bottom of the bergs.
Right.
So even if they had binoculars, and if I remember right, I think you're right. The watchman on duty at the time didn't have binoculars, but even if he had them, it would have been really hard to see the icebergs because there were no waves breaking at the bottom of them.
Well, yeah, but you can still see better with binoculars than you can the naked eye.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it would have, and like I said, if they had just turned the right direction and kept the propellers turning forward, like you say, they would have maneuvered maybe around it.
Yeah, or at least taken less of a blow from it, and and this is one of those things. I mean, it could have been, I guess. What could have been and should have been is the story of the last 100 years, right?
Well, it seemed like Murphy's Law.
Yeah,
jumped in there.
Yeah, I think 1,000 things went wrong that night.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, and appreciate the call. We're gonna let's go back to the phones and caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Don. I was watching a History Channel, I guess about 3 months ago or whenever it was, and I thought that they were warned. The Titanic. I thought they were advised that there was a big break off of the iceberg.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they just dismissed it.
Yeah, they I might have lost the caller. You still there? Yeah, it looks like we lost the caller, but yeah, they definitely were warned. One of the other ships that went through earlier did send a cable or a wire back that there were icebergs in the area, and they knew it. I mean, they were looking out for it, but they were also under orders to go as fast as they possibly could, and it ended up in tragedy. It's we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of that next year, so it's definitely one of the things that kind of shaped us. And with that, we're going to take we're going to take our last break. We'll be back to wrap the show up right after this.
A new kind of talk radio in Sussex County. Radio for you, the listener. Open source radio with Don Carpenter on 92.7 WGMD.